Hiya.
Thank you for that introduction, Freddie. Welcome. This evening, we're going to land on a number of provocations or problems as a means of opening a window onto Lea Anderson's creative practice. Not, I might add, as a historical account of a body of work, but more as a way of glimpsing a lively motile artistry that has evolved over the past 40 years and continues to do so in innovative and unexpected ways. I'll begin by saying that in addition to celebrating 40 years of the Cholmondeleys, we are also celebrating the launch of not one, but two new books. And these are books which arise out of, among other things, and with many other wonderful people, collaborations between the two of us. Lea Anderson's The Cholmondeleys and the Fanshawe's 40 Years of Style and Design is a sumptuous photographic celebration of the Cholmondeleys and Fanshawe's, interspersed with interviews with key collaborators. And in Smithereens, The Costume Remains of Lea Anderson's Stage is a monograph which I have written as a result of many, many years poking around the archives of the Cholmondeleys and the Fanshawe's, and Lee helpfully being up for any and all of that, trying to figure out, really, through hands-on practical interventions, the potential for the afterlives of costumes after the show is over. And so I want to just place these two books in the frame because the process of bringing these two publications to life has been informed by so much of what we'll be unfolding tonight in this artist encounter. Could we start by talking about space specifically, thinking firstly of the context in which the newly formed Cholmondeleys performed, in between bands, at gigs, in cramped pubs and clubs, on the run, essentially, in your Doc Martens boots?
So Mary Kate has got it all written down what she's going to say, but I'm just making it up.
Sorry.
Hence my kind of but thank you for that. And I'm really pleased tonight, So, we started out, I don't know if they ever tell you at college or when you're training how to get a gig, like how to get on stage. How does a theatre let you in? And because I'd been in bands mostly before that, my only kind of way of knowing how to get in was to ask different bands if we could support them. So the idea of the space that we could use was very limited. It was a space in front of the drum kit. And because in venues, in music venues, people are normally standing in those sort of things in those days, far, far away. We had to stand up. There was no point going below sort of the level of somebody holding a beer. And you couldn't sort of move very much. And so unison, it seemed, was a way of magnifying a movement and making it more discernible against the sort of background noise of the band, the drum kit, and everyone else. I didn't realise at the time, but it was actually quite a useful way of trying stuff out and understanding that although you have limitations in space, those limitations also offer possibilities and new ways to look at how dance might be presented. And that continued, I guess, in different projects such as Car, where all the action took place inside and around a car. It's quite strange, but it also is really interesting. And even on a normal theatre stage, it offers you something completely different. So space, I think, is a kind of an intervention in the work that I really enjoy. And the context, who are the people? Do they know it's dance? Because when we were performing with bands, no one knew it was dance. It was just something weird that was happening on the stage. And that's always quite good when people don't know it's dance, I think.
Yes, I remember you saying that you would never tell somebody that they were coming to a dance performance, that was the trick.
People could have preconceived ideas about dance performance. And also selling a work, sometimes I find if you can possibly not mention the D word, you might have other options with spaces. So
in the birthday book, we undertook the painstaking task of attempting to do a full choreo-chronicle of every work of the Cholmondeleys and Fanshawe's over 40 years. And that space thing really struck me because you see this sort of evolution. It begins with entries like Abandoned Factory, South East London, the Greenwich Foot Tunnel. And then it begins to evolve along with, indeed, the Saab car that travelled all around the country. And then on to large theatre venues like Sadler's Wells, festival tents at Glastonbury, and of course the performed exhibition at the V&A. And the other thing that struck me was the evolution of roles. So in the early Cholmondeleys days, you see lots of crossover with somebody who's performing 3 roles. So a lighting technician, for example, who might just dash down onto the stage and fill in for somebody when needed. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that sort of evolution across the years.
Well, I'm sure there's lots of people here who know about putting work on with no infrastructure and no support. And of course, Teresa was in charge of the costumes and Gaynor was in charge of doing the lighting. When we finally had somebody to operate lights, that was Mark Parry, or Ray Spangle, as he was also known. He learned some of the material so that he could run down and replace someone if they weren't available. But that's kind of quite normal. I just want to say that that used to be a late night drinking bar just down the road from here. And I don't think that they knew we were going to perform that night. That's the Fanshaw's probably first ever gig. Yes, so everyone had to be very flexible, but what's new? It feels like we're coming around to that time again.
And speaking of flexibility, I'd like to bring up collaboration, because I think we have a tendency sometimes to think that there's some kind of universal or sanctioned understanding of what collaboration is, when actually, in fact, collaboration is quite unruly and messy. And it's unique not only to the individuals themselves, but then the particular collision that happens when a set of materials and a group of people come together to make a work. And you have quite particular ways of collaborating. For example, oftentimes that key collaborators, like maybe a composer and costume designer, may not have met or discussed the work until quite late on in the creative process. So I wonder, could you talk about that a little?
Because they don't normally talk much, there's not much to say about that. But I suppose the most interesting thing about collaborating is that the other person's got something really interesting to offer. And again, it's like space, it's like a restriction, which is also an opportunity to see things slightly differently. I really enjoy having to take on someone else's ideas about what we might do. There might be lights on the floor, or there might be, dancers' heads might be totally covered up and they can't see where they're going, but that's quite interesting. That throws up a whole different set of opportunities and ways of moving. And it also means that that the performers that I collaborate with need to be up for that kind of way of working. Not everyone's interested in that. It's not only designers and composers, but also the people that are working within that, the performers, need also to take that on board and be okay with it, or even challenged and happy about it. Not everyone is, I promise you. Cover their head up and...
Well, we might come back to that a little bit in a moment, in specifically to do with costume. And in relation to that, I'm going to quote scholar Jessica Bugg, who quotes you in an interview as saying, "I will not present anything in dance pajamas, and I will not present anything in bare feet. I just don't understand what that means, apart from you just got out of bed, or I'm not dressed." So would you like to respond to that in relationship to costume?
Yeah. I guess that there's so much sort of complex meaning with how we as humans wear our clothing and how we behave wearing clothing, and what shoes do to our movements. And barefoot is fine, but I think it kind of misses, you miss a lot of opportunity to be more complex, or to change the meaning of the movement. Can I talk about the flesh and blood dress here?
Yeah.
Good.
That's where I was leading you.
So, I was, when I worked on Flesh and Blood, a work that I made in 1989, I did the normal thing of asking the designer, who's Sandy Powell, to come in towards the end a bit. We talked about it at the beginning, and then she came in at the end and watched rehearsals, and it was nearly finished. And in the dance, people are sort of standing up, falling down, rolling, thrashing around. And Sandy looked really not very excited about it. And I was, what do you reckon? And she said, well, what I think they should be wearing, seeing as the subject matter is the Passion of Joan of Arc by Dreyer and various other sort of sacred imagery, would be to wear a full-length silver reflective dress to the floor that makes beautiful patterns when it falls to the floor. I thought, how can we do that? We're just, there's too much rolling around on the floor to do that. And she said, well, it's either that or dance pajamas, I suppose, if you want. And I thought, I don't want dance pajamas. I want something very special that brings something else, but I really didn't know how to handle it. So after a very tortured evening, wondering what the hell to do, I realised that if I re-choreographed another layer of movement on top of it all, of all the movement that we had, that manipulated the dresses. So if you were falling to the floor on a four and, you had to flick the dress with your left hand on the and before. So everyone's doing it together, and then you control also how the fabric falls, and it gives opportunities for the light to work in a different way. So the dancers weren't happy because it was quite late on, and to learn all this new stuff. But it really, and I think it made something that wasn't, it made something much better than the movement and the material we already had. It improved it. It was just more complicated and more interesting. And that was a major breakthrough in my thinking, is that when you put in a difficulty or you actually challenge what you're doing, rather than doing the easy thing, like having the light on the whole stage so that the dancer is always well seen, maybe going into the darkness or having complicated things or not dancing on to exactly what you might expect to the music might be more interesting if it's planned from the beginning. And I really enjoy that. I really enjoy when someone's bringing something else to it and challenging me. So, yeah, it's fun.
We're going to watch a clip of Joan in a moment, but before we do you want to mention the idea of cross-casting as well? Because what we're watching is a work that was choreographed on the Cholmondeleys, but the clip we're watching is the fan shows. So.
I don't know if I've got anything to say about that. Yeah, it's just, what can I say? We were doing it was another anniversary, and decided to do 2 old works, but to change the companies. So it was the fanshaws wearing the dresses this time, but they were men's dresses. I was interested to see what it would look like, what it would mean. So I don't always have a strong opinion about what it's going to be like. I just know that it's going to be interesting in some way, and it's worth doing. Yeah.
Okay, let's watch it. So in that clip of Joan, the specificity of gesture is really evident. And as you mentioned, that piece of choreography is drawing very specifically on images from the 1928 film, The Passion of Joan of Arc, by Carl Theodor Dreyer. But I'd like to follow on from that to ask, what does copying mean to you? Because I'm conscious here that the copying of something is a very specific task that sometimes you set yourselves and the dancers. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that in relationship to the fanshaws drawn the sketchbooks of Egon Schiele or edits.
Copying is really good fun. Yeah, why make something new if you can just copy something that already exists, recycling and all that. I like to copy things for all sorts of reasons, but one reason that's really great is that if you've got a group of dancers I'm working with and we're all copying, say, Busby Berkeley films dances exactly as it appears in the film, not what you know what's happening, but as you see it, or it kind of takes you to another place. You're not thinking about what kind of dancer you are. You're having to copy. And so it's like, instead of coming from inside out, it comes from outside in. You sort of just copy it until it becomes something else. And we re-look at it and read what it says. So I copied Passion of Joan of Arc from memory, and it was kind of all right, but it wasn't as interesting as really copying. Like I've copied Laurel and Hardy and The Bitter Tears of Petra von Kant, and differently, Egon Schiele. He didn't do many dances for me to copy, but he did have sketchbooks which had drawings in them that looked very much like Laban notation drawings of space. That was quite soon after I finished at Laban, I think. And when I saw that Thames and Hudson had reprinted Egon Schiele, I could see that if I was a professor of misconstruction, I might misread this as a document, as a score for a lost dance of Egon Schiele. But have to follow it literally. Can't just sort of be inspired by it. You have to actually do each little picture, has to be in it. Pedantic, yeah, I know. But then I just get obsessed with it. I just love finding things to copy. What's not to like? And then when you see them in a different context, with different costumes or slightly different costumes in different light, with different music, you sort of correct everything. It's really exciting. So yeah, I do like a copy.
Mm. And maybe that's a good moment as well then to move on. You mentioned copying Busby Berkeley, but to the idea of the chorus line, because the chorus line is also something that crops up in a number of your works like Smithereens and Yippee, but there's a very particular treatment of it. And I'll read you a quote here that comes up in the birthday book from a conversation between you and Sandy Powell. And Sandy says, "I do like uniformity. I do like a bunch of people all in exactly the same thing. A chorus line looks really great, especially when everyone is doing everything exactly together. In your choreography, you have that, but your dancers aren't really a chorus line because they are all different shapes and sizes, whereas a chorus line is all same size people, isn't it? They should all have the same color hair, doing the same things in the same clothes. So it's a mixture of the chorus line approach, but with individuals."
Chorus lines are quite favourite, like the endless chorus line that just sort of run around the back and just join on. So it's just this endless line and you sort of cut it off by the yard kind of thing. I like different shapes and sizes of dancer, and I like the conversations that you have to have when you're negotiating. You know, if you've got like 6 little shuffles over and somebody's got really long legs and somebody's got really small legs, how you manage to do that. And I enjoy seeing people that are dressed exactly the same with wigs on. You don't even have the same colour hair, they just wear wigs or cover their faces. And everyone's different and their movement's slightly different, but we're just trying to be the same and trying to cover the same amount of space. So I prefer that to having everyone identical, but I like everyone trying to be, like we're all trying to be the same.
Yes, which invites then a particular kind of looking as well. Yeah, the differences in that can't be ironed out in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, then that chorus line effect is made much more difficult if you're all different heights, leg lengths. And then if you add on, for example, having no peripheral vision because you're wearing a mask or indeed a bobblehead that you can't really see through. And I have a quote from you in my book about the process of working on Smithereens with the masks and in particular the bobblehead costumes, which I think you'll see in a moment. And you said, the dancers hated it and they couldn't see very well. It was difficult for them. And that's when I started thinking, I'm really only interested in dancers who are willing to put up with really bad things and to be excited by that. And before you respond to that, I might read a little more about that sense of surrendering to the difficulty of costumes. So costumes that might be sort of working against you in a slightly adversarial fashion by restricting your breathing or your vision. So I'm going to read here a quote from a Cholmondeley, Teresa Barker, and a Fanshawe, Luca Silvestrini, about their experience as working as dancers with you. So from Teresa, the dancer's work had to become something above and beyond the choreography and the dance itself. A particular mindset was needed to hold with ease what essentially became mini emergency ordeals each night backstage, the emergencies of manic costume changes. On top of this, there was the task of coming to know how to wear with grace beyond all restriction the different kind of impingement upon one's movement scope and possibility, the high heels, the waistline strap 2-pound battery pack, the wetsuit and flippers, the studded biker's jacket, the breathlessly tight corsets, etc., etc. Far-out costumes and faster than the speed of light costume changes became features of Cholmondeley's and Fanshawe's life. And from Luca Silvestrini, some people work with characterization from an emotional point of view or from a story. With Lea, the characterization comes through the limitations she offers you, through costumes, props, staging. So it's a process. You know there is a challenge. You need to go from here to there. It's not just given. You've got to find it. You've got to adapt. You've got to surrender bit by bit to whatever limitations are offered to you. But that becomes part of the performance. That becomes part of your subtext and your reason to be on stage.
I don't think I did it on purpose, like upset people or tortured them on purpose. But I realised that if that's not your thing, it makes you really miserable. So when I say that I prefer to work with people who are into that, that's the reason why. So I don't want to, you don't want to mess up people's lives. They'll never dance again because I put them in a potato head.
Can you talk about the timing of the costume changes as well?
The costume changes came in because I think we started doing lots of costume changes in Smithereens, and I knew that because when we were doing lots of little bits a long, long time ago with the Cholmondeleys at the beginning, we'd have to do costume changes whilst there was maybe a stand-up comic on, and then we'd have to run on and be ready. So we'd sort of talked about that a lot at that time. But by the time we got to Smithereens, I think I'd made a show for really a cast of 20, and I only had 10. And we had so many little bits of costume change that I realised that the only way we were going to do it is if we treated a costume change as another piece of choreography, so that somebody would be waiting for you with your shoes facing the right way, and you would always step in left, right. You'd always, someone would put your hat on whilst you were putting your gloves on. So there was always it was as strictly choreographed as any movement. It was, in fact, a costume change duet. And we spent a week, I think, rehearsing and timing costume changes. And of course, that's not a nice thing to do just before you're opening a show and you want to practice all the dancing bits. But it did mean that the costume changing became more efficient, and I also got a bit obsessed with it. And then in other shows, we started presenting costume changes on stage. For example, in Yippee, we had not only costume changes on the side of stage and rails full of costumes, but we also had the character of the wardrobe mistress, who was in charge of all that and became another character, another person who only inhabited the edges of a stage. So it kind of kept moving on. And then in edits, I was copying a Fassbinder film, The Bitter Tears of Petra von Kant, and what I was copying were the actual edit points. So if you've got someone talking to someone else, and then it cuts to a wider, longer shot, and there's someone else in it. At some point, we would all have to jump out of the frame, and somebody dressed in the same outfit, which had to be recognisable by colour, maybe, jumped in at that exact time. So it meant that the characters in the piece were the costumes and not the performer. And so the way of moving had to be suggested by the costume itself. For example, a long velvet dress would move after you did and settle. A dress with a train would make the dancer be very aware of the pathway that they're taking, and it draws attention to what's happened to them, to the past, to where they've just walked, so that the costumes become something else. And the changes become something else. So it's constantly changing. There isn't kind of a technique it's just like you do that with one thing, and then when you work with your collaborators again, they say, why don't we, we did that last time, why don't we do this? And
because there's the raising of the curtain round as well, isn't it?
Oh, yes, it's because we were doing all the costume changes in Smithereens. Simon Corder, the staging designer, suggested to bring the back curtain up so that you could just see everyone running around so fast and doing the costume, just to sort of reveal that. So that kind of was a stage before we brought it out to the sides, and then it became part of the main work.
We're going to watch a clip of Russian Roulette now, which is going slightly back, but I think it gives a sense of that achieving a chorus line effect with some restrictions, I think was what we were thinking
I think this is mostly restriction.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, this is Simon Vincenzi's design for Russian Roulette, and Rachel's lighting. Rachel. Oh, and Steve's music.
We got to there's nobody looking for. We got
I'd like to sidestep now from working with restrictions that you impose upon yourselves and the dancers to an example of what it is to work with restrictions that you haven't chosen. And of course, working during the global COVID-19 pandemic is a rich example of this, of what it might mean to really take on a difficulty, you know, not just thinking, oh gosh, there's logistics to work out, but actually to make that the central impetus of the work. And so I'd like to actually jump straight into the next clip, which is Elvis Leg's Quarantine Mix, and then maybe you can speak about that.
Okay.
You look free of any drips.
Okay,
Recording.
right. No pressure at all. It's absolutely fine.
Okay, I'm recording.
Okay.
Okay, I'm recording.
Yeah,
So whenever you're ready.
Recording.
One,
Okay.
two,
I'm not
three, four,
recording.
One, two, three, 4, 5, 6. wet gloves now.
Maybe you could start by saying how it was made.
Elvis Legs Quarantine Mix came from Elvis Legs, which was a stage work that we also actually did as cabaret in places like Vauxhall Tavern. And it started by copying every move that Elvis Presley made in every one of his films. Dancers were copying and remembering a move and then making a list of it as if we were making a dictionary of Elvis Presley moves. And then we just sort of cut it into lengths, patterns of behaviour. And when COVID came along and everyone was locked in and no one could do anything, it seemed like a really good idea to try and do something with people locked down. And Simon Vincenzi, who designed it, sent parcels to all the dancers, sort of design parcels with a bit of costume, a backdrop, I think a light, a little picture of Elvis to put in the back somewhere. And everyone filmed it on their phones. And then we tried to put it together, which was much trickier than you might think. And all the dancers who were up for it and could do it, they had to live within delivery distance of the objects, the costume and so we had to eliminate someone who was in the United States because we just couldn't get the costume there. They were all dancers who normally you'd put at the front because they're really confident with the counts. They know what comes next in the pattern. And the weird thing is, maybe it's obvious that when you're doing something on your own and it's a group thing, if you're not in the room with someone, that confidence and that ability to know exactly what's going to come next vanishes. It becomes really difficult. It was really interesting to see dancers that are usually so on the count doubt themselves. And so I realised, there's a thing about being in the room with people and how we move when there's other people in the room. So, so we did rehearsals on Zoom. There were a bunch of brave people who went down to Brockwell Park for a rehearsal, a distance rehearsal. And and we did that.
Which is a really different then use of space as well, when you say the not having the sense of other bodies around you. I think that comes through quite a lot.
Yes, and we learnt a lot about the camera, everyone's cameras, they are slightly different. It was really hard to get them to look very similar. And the light, and we realised too late, they got a bit of a smudge on their lens. And there's nothing we could do about that, so that's included. So yeah, it was quite tricky.
Yes, and all of these restrictions then are part of that's the deal with the work. That's the absolute, it makes the work. Yeah.
And it reminds you, of course, as well of what actually happened then.
I'd like to throw a couple of other things at you. If I were to say the term colour narrative, what would that bring up?
Colour narrative. I guess colour narrative, it's something that Sandy and I have spoken about, which is about how if you have everybody in the company in the same outfit but different colours, but different colours, how that can be quite interesting when you have these sort of random collections of people. You might have the green person and the yellow person at one point, and then you could have opposite colours some other time. So it's you see things differently when people are wearing different colours than if they're all wearing exactly the same, obviously, but it's kind of interesting. And that happened in edits as well, when each dress had a different colour, but that helped you understand who was who, whereas in Egon Schiele it's kind of like just putting up new mixtures of colour.
Yeah, Sandy talks about that as well, the mixtures that some feel off but in a good way, and others you put the two together and it makes a whole new sort of feeling when the colours come together.
Yeah.
I also wanted to ask about this sense of what is an edge or what is an act, the obsession where one edge ends and another one starts. And you've spoken as well to me about the idea of having tracks on an album. Maybe you could expand on those ideas.
Yeah, I quite like acts, you know, like a cabaret act or a musical act. And they come on and they do something and then it's like, and that's the end. And there's another act or something. I quite like that. I quite like, and then there's songs. When I was in a band, you'd have different songs and you try and mix them all up. But it's the same people playing all the music and it's the same sort of music, but they're different bits. I'm a bit obsessed with what is a bit, what makes the end of one section and the beginning of another. Like in Smithereens, if there's just loads and loads of bits put together, how do you do that? How do you put bits together? Yeah, it's much more interesting in a dance than me talking about it.
Yeah, you talk about, you know, is it when someone enters the space or leaves the space?
Yeah, or crosses the line, or goes into the light, or changes costume, or the music stops and starts, or a different sound comes in.
We have here some images from your sketchbook.
Yeah, that's from Smithereens. It's hard to talk about because there's edges in pictures in your sketchbook, but when it's in sort of time-based edges or space-based edges, that's kind of different.
You talked to me in terms of Smithereens about this idea of sort of having a whole catalogue of 20th century performance and what had gone before. And I think I remember you using the image of like a, you know, Rolodex, sort of these different collection of fragments.
Yeah. So the way to tell one bit from another is a costume, and the fact that those performers are leaving and there's another performers arriving. So it was, So I was collecting pictures of performance from the 20th century, all sorts of performance. So it could be Weimar, cabaret, or it could be a Bauhaus performance, art, or Mary Wigman doing something strange, or just different things. But rather than actually trying to reproduce what those people really did, I just copied my pictures. I made a storyline and just copied them, as if I was a professor of misconstruction and was misreading the history of 20th century performance, you know, because it's fun. Yeah, and just make, you know, try and make sense of the images.
A final sort of problem, so to speak, and one I think which is proving still incredibly generative in terms of making new work and looking towards the future, is tangled up with what remains after a work has finished, what gets left behind and what travels onwards through the future. And firstly, to touch on, I suppose, our collaboration and how it has been to work together, I'd like to read a little short passage from my book. There's a familiar posture that gets adopted in the costume lockup, like two character actors in an abstract material landscape of sequins, plastic oddments, and grime. The artist and the scholar. She, poring over a costume or a sketchbook or a mixtape with a legible biro listing scrawled on the back, and I, standing aside, pen or camera phone in hand, not wishing to break the reverie. These objects speak to the sheer, non-biodegradable hulk involved in recording things at that time. What it took to harvest sounds or images for an imagined future work, or capture aspects of an already made work for posterity. Exclamations of, "Oh my gosh," or "I don't believe it," or "Yes, I remember this," are all commonplace punctuations of our meditative scenes together in the archive. Our relationships to the materials to hand and the legacy which arguably lies therein or elsewhere are wholly different. But our impetus in what we attempt to mine these materials for is not so dissimilar. There is something at stake in these moments. We try to make the most of what we find, make the most of what it can tell us, of how we might use it and where, if anywhere, it could travel to for the future. We had a conversation very early on in my work with the Costume Archive, and you were talking about the problem of the costumes and the volume of them that remain when the shows are no longer being performed. And you said to me, sometimes, you know, I think I will burn them all and that will be a work. Or perhaps auction off a few at Sotheby's to fund a new work. Or maybe I should give some of them to somewhere like the V&A after all. And this set things spinning for me and in essence forged the shape of all the practical interventions with the costume archive from there as a means of finding what in fact are the possibilities for costume afterlives. And at a point kind of when I'm trying to conclude things, both in the research and the book, these problems come back to haunt me a little. And so I write, the work with the costumes outlined so far steers towards an inescapable conclusion that endings are not as they seem. Performances vanish, companies disband, memories fade, and yet some stuff gets left behind. Not inconsequential stuff, it must be said, which takes all manner of material and immaterial form. Fabric remains, defunct utilitarian objects, recollections, stains, rips in the structure of things, contradictions to the record laid down on paper, misremembered steps, hummed refrains, a lone thread snagged on a silver buckled shoe. Smithereens, they could be called. Things from there and then, still here and now, and in fact, travelling onwards towards another there and then, which we are called to imagine. The question that has already cropped up comes one last time. What to do? What to do with all of this stuff?
Well, the thing to do, I reckon, my favourite thing to do is it's really interesting when you get to do the work again. Like putting the men in dresses, it's an excuse to look at it again. And Steve writes a different kind of, the same music, but different instrumentation. It's slightly different. The costumes change, the performers change, and you can sort of improve it. You can correct it, and you can keep correcting it. I'd love to keep correcting it, make another version of it. And this is better than this is the best one until the next one. So, I like to hang on to them for a bit, just so that we know what everything looked like. But also, Steve Blake and I, we had a go at, I was supposed to be doing a podcast, but I couldn't do podcasts because it's not got any pictures in it, really. So so Steve made some really silly films in the archive, trying to look at bits of stuff that were left over that you couldn't correct and that we wouldn't have in the future. And we called them archival droplets, and we're not sure really what to do with them yet, but we've got to, don't know, put them on Instagram or something.
Shall we watch one?
You can watch one if you want. Yeah?
Yep.
Sorry, Steve, I didn't tell you I was doing this. No, it's not. Maybe. Flesh and Blood cassette by the Pointy Birds. You'd forgotten that even existed.
I had completely forgotten. I guess I've got a fairly good recording of it at home, bits of it, but I didn't know it was actually manufactured and sold like that. And you say that we sold quite a few of them.
Yeah, we did. Yeah.
I wonder if anyone watching or listening to this has a copy. Phone in, tell us.
I wonder if anyone watching or listening even has a cassette player.
That's true.
Yeah. So you're playing, what are you playing? Keyboards, soprano and alto sax, didgeridoo. You've got David Fitzgerald on cello and John Edwards on double bass.
Yeah, the Pointy Birds, lovely band.
Lovely music.
Thank you. It was written for the Pointy Birds, wasn't it? For the original show, and then we resurrected it.
Yeah,
When
in the
did we
sort of late
resurrect it?
90s. Sort of, I don't know, 96
and it was a
something.
much rockier band, wasn't it? Yeah.
And then you did another version for the men who did the double take tour. 3 different versions of one show, one piece of music, quite a bit.
I always felt a little reluctant whenever you say, "Oh, we're going to redo this show." I'm always a bit like, "Oh, I want to do something new." But it always, it's a real luxury to be able to revisit things you've done and iron out the bits that aren't so good and
Yeah.
make it more relevant to where you're at the time, for sure.
No, definitely.
So that feels like a good moment then to open up to the floor to questions if people have any.
Or we could just go to the bar.
Yes.
Hi there.
Oh, yeah.
I was just wondering what emotion you felt when the cat walked across the stage in the COVID
Elvis.
clip. Correct.
The cat, because the cat gets a
Yeah,
mention.
the cat walked across the stage. But that was fantastic because that was, it really showed that was everyone's room. It wasn't a set. That was everyone's home. And so the cat solo, I thought was very, very important, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I was really glad that the cat didn't trip him over, yet we were able to enjoy the cat.
Really used to it. We had a dog come on the stage in Switzerland.
That's true. Yeah, a dog walked onto stage when we were doing Flesh and Blood in Switzerland. And I believe that John, was it John, playing double bass, could make a barking sound with his instrument, which got the dog even more excited. Yeah. Touring.
I seem to remember a man walked on stage with a bike out on a windy beach. It was an outdoor performance. It might have been in Brighton, near the beach, and he stayed on stage for a while, so we had to work around him, I think.
So did anyone get him off?
No, we stayed for a bit. He sat at the front then afterwards for a while. We may have given him a little shove at some point, but he was there for a bit, I think.
But again, I think this all speaks to the slightly unruly aspect that you, in a sense, doing things like in a car that's travelling around the country or on a windy beach.
Outdoors, yeah.
Or in people's homes who have pets, etc. That's all, again, baked into this sense of, okay, this is what we're working with.
It invites a little bit of a frisson of...
A certain something.
Yeah, absolutely. When we were doing, I remember once doing the car show in France somewhere, and we were driving up to the location where it was to take place, and they wouldn't let us in. Like, sorry, no, there's a performance on here. Just drive that car away. And we had to go all the way around. Yeah, we had like three approaches to try and get in. Yeah, this sort of stuff. That's what happens, isn't it?
Could you talk a little bit because we didn't really speak about the idea of the performed exhibition, but again, how that particular space operating in a gallery space, but actually doing performance excerpts, what the tension of that is?
I think I did the exhibition because I think Jane Pritchard at the V&A had talked about putting the costumes and objects into, giving them to a collection. And then I went and looked at some exhibition you have costumes in glass, and you have like maybe a bit of film of the movement, but you don't see how the costume really works, and you don't see why the decisions were made about the design of that piece of costume when it's like that. It's kind of dead and gone. And I thought maybe it might be better to just present a little bit of the actual movement itself. Mm-hmm. But that still is still in the context of a museum, and you're still seeing it as with all the other pieces. So it's not quite correct. You need to see it on a stage or as part of a performance, really. So it can't be done. But it was an attempt to try and address that dilemma.
Yes, I remember you saying that looking at the costumes in costume exhibitions made you think of dead butterflies pinned.
Yeah, and you can see good things. Like you can see, it's really nice to see. All the makeup that can't be removed from the costume that when you look closely, and all the different name tapes that maybe have been sewn in and removed. You can see the history of it, but that's not the meaning of the costume in the context of performance. That's something else. And it is interesting, but it's just not it's not my thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Any more questions?
Lea, if money was no object, what of your works would you like to remake? And where?
Funny you should ask that.
Funny you should ask that.
Do tell.
Well, there's two things, really. One is I'd really like to do an archival reconstruction of Smithereens with the original cast. who have got old with the piece, and to film it. So that's one fantasy. But if I could do Yippee again, I'd love to. I'd really like to do Yippee again. Yeah, you know, and correct them, or a new one. A new one's, you know. But an archival reconstruction of Smithereens would be quite funny. I've asked nearly all the cast, and they're kind of agreed. I can't say who.
Stay tuned.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. That's great. That's got me excited. Yeah, doing more things would be more interesting than anything else. Is it bar time yet?
I can see the microphone travelling up. Is there another one?
I find it very easy to believe that nothing is ever really new. So on the topic of copying, how do you go about giving credit creatively or advise current choreographers to do?
When I copied Busby Berkeley, because I copied it so exactly, I was really worried about people thinking that I was taking the credit for this wonderful choreography. So I let it be known that I'm copying Busby Berkeley. I made it really, really clear. And many reviewers reviewed it and said, how dare she imply that this awful work could possibly be the work of Busby Berkeley? This is not Busby Berkeley. And it's like, it is exactly Busby Berkeley. So it's kind of, that copying was like sort of literally copying the exact steps. Other copying, like copying edits, like misconstructing something as a movement, a sequence that everyone else might see as a story that has words and a narrative. It's a different kind of copying. But yeah, the only time I was really open and clear about what I was copying, no one believed me. So don't worry about it. Just do it. Just copy it. Yeah.
Before I hand back to Freddie and Anthony, I believe, I just want to say a very happy 40th birthday to the Cholmondeleys.
Hooray! Yeah, thank you, Cholmondeleys and Fanchos.